In this video, I'll be showing you how you can use up some of that scrap wood you have lying around to make a gorgeous, one-of-a-kind napkin holder. The first thing I did was cut up some scrap MDF to make the mold for pouring the epoxy. The reason I did this first was so that I could fit all the napkin holder pieces to it. The end goal for the sides of the napkin holder is 5 inches by 6 inches, so I added an extra 1/4 inch to the side of the mold to allow for flushing and squaring up the edges. Then I coated the walls and base of the mold with tuck tape so the epoxy would release easier. Next, the pieces got screwed together and the seam sealed off. With the mold done, we can actually get to using up some of the scraps that have been laying around for the last few years. First, I cut out the pattern I designed and applied double-sided tape to the back. If you don't feel like making your own pattern, I'll put a link in the description to where you can purchase the same one I'm using. Then, using scissors, I cut out all the pieces, but staying back from the line. I used my thicker scrap so that I could just do one pour and then resaw down the middle, giving me my 2 sides. Thanks to the double-sided tape, we essentially turned the templates into stickers, allowing me to peel the back off and stick them down in whatever orientation I desire. Next, I cut all the pieces on the bandsaw, again staying a hair back from the line as I will have to sand to it later. Some of these pieces were a little small and my fingers had to get closer to the blade than I'd prefer. It would not have been a bad idea to use some sort of scrap wood with clamps to keep my fingers at a safer distance. With all the pieces cut out, I went over to the disc sander and sanded down to the line. This step is a little tedious, but it pays off in the end when you're left with nice, even parallel gaps between them. When sanding like this, it's also important to not use too much pressure and to keep the pieces moving slightly to prevent any burning. Here I'm using some super glue to tack the pieces in place inside the mold so they don't move around when I pour the epoxy. Then I mixed up some clear epoxy and poured it into the mold, overflowing the top a little bit. I decided to leave mine clear so as to give the pieces a floating effect, but if you decide to make this and want to color the epoxy, you certainly could. After letting it sit a few minutes to let the bubbles rise, I came back with a propane torch to pop any of those bubbles and am left with a glass-like surface. After letting it sit a couple days, I came back and removed the mold, and thankfully the tuck tape did its job and it popped out with little effort. It was then run through the drum sander a couple times to remove the excess epoxy and trim the sides and ends over at the table saw to the final dimension of 5 inches by 6 inches. I then cut the corners 3/4 of an inch down each side using a dovetail saw, since it was quicker than making sure I had the right angle set on the machine. Now I can resaw the board to give me both sides. After that, they were ran through the drum sander to smooth out the bandsaw marks. I didn't have an exact thickness I was shooting for, mainly trying to keep them as thick as possible. I ended up at just under 3/8 of an inch. I then paused working on the sides and cut the base that would attach the two sides. It measured 2 inches wide by the same length and thickness as the sides. Back at the sides, I cut a small slot halfway through the sides for the base to slide into. I took a lot of little passes here as I was trying to sneak up on that right size and get that perfect fit. Then everything was sanded to a high grit and glued together using epoxy. Wood glue would have worked, but since the epoxy is clear on the sides, I didn't want to be able to see any glue through it. After it was together, I gave the sides and edges a quick once over to smooth off any sharp edges. And lastly, I applied 2 coats of finish. Here is how it came out. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, I would greatly appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed. And thanks for watching.